This is Time Signatures with Jim Ervin, a podcast and radio program presented by the Capital Area Blues Society in Lansing, Michigan.
Driving up and down these Michigan roads, yeah.
And now, here he is, your host, Jim Ervin.
Well, thank you so much, Parker, and welcome to Time Signatures. I'm your host, Jim Ervin, and today's guest is here to celebrate with us because he's about to launch a brand new album. But you all know how this works by now. We have to get some cool stories along the way. Where do I start with today's guest? He's an award-winning singer, a songwriter, producer, and a touring musician. He is a former member of the legendary Lansing blues band, The Root Doctor, and while he was there, their album Change Our Ways was nominated for a BMA with the Soul Blues category and charted in the top 10 for Living Blues radio charts in 2007. But it doesn't stop there. He's also played and recorded for Grammy-winning artist Bobby Murray. He's recorded with Ronnie Earl and Nick Tabarias. He has 3 solo albums to his credit: Walk That Fine Thin Line, his 2011 follow-up Fell Toward None, and of course 2015's effort entitled Stranded, an album, by the way, that's still generating kudos and acclaim for our guest. These days, you'll find him playing at local venues such as Whiskey Six, tearing it up with the Men of Leisure, and of course, playing guitar with Larry McRae. Now, I got to stop because I could just keep going, man. Greg Nagy, welcome to Time Signatures. How are you doing, my friend?
Man, this has been a long time coming. Actually, that was one of the Root Doctor CD titles, wasn't it? Been a long time.
Yeah.
Oh, well. No, man, I'm doing good. How about you?
I'm doing well, man. I'm so glad to have you here, and it's an exciting time for you because you got a new album coming out. We're going to get to that in a couple of minutes, but for those that don't know who you are, let's give them a bit of your backstory. Where did your journey in music begin, Greg?
I have to tread lightly on this one because I had this question me years ago. I think it was a journalist down in, I want to say South Bend, Indiana, and they asked me the same question. And I said, well, like most prepubescent males, I was into whatever was on the radio when I was in middle school. And my first concert was Ted Nugent, like whatever, and, it wasn't like I ever had dreams of being a rocker or Ted Nugent or any of that, but that's what I said in the article. And so they said, I said Ted Nugent and Cheap Trick, when I was like 14. Right. And they wrote in the newspaper that I sounded like Ted Nugent and Cheap Trick.
Oh no!
At the show, I was to do a show, and I'm like, if people show up to this show thinking they're going to hear "I Want You to Want Cat Scratch Fever," whatever of those two bands, I'm like, I'm toast. So I tread lightly. I do not try to play like Ted Nugent or Cheap Trick. As a kid, I loved both of them, and without getting too deep into it, one of them I still like. I'll let you guess which. Cheap Trick.
Well, talk about some of your biggest influences in the music business while you were coming up.
Yeah. So for me, it was at the age of 19, and this is almost a cliche among some blues guys and blues inspired musicians. I was 19 years old. A really good friend of mine by the name of John Selly was really big into Albert King and Robert Johnson and all that stuff.
Okay.
And he had me over to his house, and he played for me Drowning on Dry Land, Albert King. And it was the first time in my life I ever felt goosebumps listening to music. I felt adrenaline rushes. I could be practicing for football in high school and listening to Foreigner, feels like the first time, and feeling but I never felt the goosebumps. I'm like, what is this? And I was hooked from that day forward. And then, Albert King, the three kings, Freddie King,
Sure.
B.B.
Oh yeah.
Earl King later. But and then by the time, so we're talking the 80s here. It was the 1980s. And then by the 90s, I started discovering people like Ronnie Earl and folks like that. And that was very inspiring. And then it just goes off in 18 million different directions, from the soul blues to the rock blues to the, I don't know. I like it all, but I kind of go through periods, and it shows in my records. My records end up being pretty eclectic and sometimes all over the map because I just like so many different approaches to what's essentially blues,
Right.
but it manifests itself in a variety of ways, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Greg, did you always see yourself as a musician when you were growing up, or is it just something that you kind of stepped into after that initial?
No, it's a very here's a nerdy term, circuitous. It was a very
Yep.
circuitous route for me. Started playing guitar when I was 14, and then sports, and then my attempt to meet girls, which wasn't that impressive, and then the military, and then competitive weightlifting, and then a debilitating injury, and then back to music, and then out of the military into college and set music off to the side for a minute, and then got through maybe 3 years of graduate school at Wayne State, and it was in the early 90s that it's when it all clicked where I wanted to be a professional musician. So within 6 months of deciding that and not really ever having been a professional up until that point, I've been in a few bands here and there. Maybe in college there was a band that lasted a minute called Smokehouse, and it was fun, but it was more of the hobbyist level, which is cool. Probably had more fun doing that because it was the hobbyist level. But then it was about 93. I remember watching it's kind of corny, but it was Les McCann was a motivational speaker back then. He had a book out called Yes You Can by Les McCann. And
Okay.
they were doing a fundraiser on PBS, and it was the middle of the night, and his special, they were broadcasting his special, and he had a line in there. He said about what you should do with your life. He said, what's the first thing you think about in the morning when you get up, and what's the last thing you think about before you go to sleep at night? Well, the first thing I couldn't make money at. I'll let that one sink in for a minute. The second, because it's illegal in most states. Anyhow, being another question is what the joke is. But the second was music. It was music. It was that type of thing that whenever I was in it, it was all consuming. So I decided to drop out of a PhD program in sociology
Wow.
at State,
Wow.
and I just started woodshedding like 12 hours a day. And within 6 months, I found myself in probably what some would argue would be one of the strongest bands in the state, called Acme Jam, led
Okay.
by my old friend Steve Ferrari. And I was definitely the weak link in that band, but I was driven, and I've always had that mindset. I may not be the most talented guy in the room, but I'm going to outwork everybody else around me. So I worked really hard at that. That led to Root Doctor, and it kept unfolding from there. And then my solo career, and
Well, I
and so
want to stop you for 1 second. I want to step back, and I'd like you to talk about, because you were with the Root Doctor band for about 5 years.
correct.
And I remember my interview early on, season one. I had Jim Alfredson and Mike Scory in the room, which is really cool because they both were keyboard players for Root Doctor, but at different times, obviously. And the stories that they shared were just incredible. But I'd like to get your take on that. What was that experience like for you, being with Freddie and the Root Doctor band?
Um, okay, so what had happened by the time I got to Root Doctor? So I played with Acme Jam. I did a thing called the Greg Nagy Trio in the '90s, right?
Hmm.
And then my family moved to Virginia, and I didn't play for about 5 years.
Okay.
Nothing. I was raising little kids, had some health issues, and they were kind of serious at times. And is when I came back to Michigan that Jim Elfredson. I had reached out to Jim Elfredson because I stumbled upon something on the internet about his Organissimo band, his organ jazz trio.
Uh-huh.
And I was just like, well, this stuff's really good. How come nobody's ever heard of it? And so then I just sort of thought, I'm just going to reach out. I'm not really playing music, but I talked to enough people about promoting music and doing that sort of thing. I'm like, I'm going to just reach out to him. I don't know him. And just ask him what he's doing to promote his stuff. And we got talking, and he goes, well, I remember your name, he says, but he was awfully young in the 90s. Because I remember your name, Brown. Are you playing anymore? Well, what I didn't know at the time is they were looking for a guitar player for Root Doctor at the time.
Oh, wow.
Different guys, and it wasn't
Yeah.
out. And so he had a different he had a different idea that I didn't know about. So he came over to my house, and the first day Jim and I met, within 20 minutes, we wrote a song that later appeared on my first album. And then he came up with the subject of how would you like to be in Root Doctor? And I'm like freaked out by it because I hadn't played in 5 years. I mean, my guitar strings were literally rusty.
Oh boy.
I said, well, I'll do it if we can make some records, because that's one of the things I've always played with these really talented people in the past. And I've always wanted to make a record, and we weren't all looking in the same direction together. You know, not everybody wants to do that kind of nutty thing. Which I understand that too, by the way. So then I joined Root Doctor, and within probably 6 months, we were in the studio.
Wow.
And then, you know, we did three albums together. Yeah. 2 studio albums and 1 live album. And then I think you may have mentioned it in the introduction. The second one got nominated for a National Blues Music Award. And
that's cool.
Yeah, we got to go down to Tunica, Mississippi for the Blues Music Awards, and I got to meet all kinds of people that I was a big fan of back then. So, but
what an experience. That's cool.
Yeah.
Now,
and then go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, no, so then it was just kind of like everything's been kind of like a circuitous route. So, you know, then I left Root Doctor after 5 years. It was a great experience. We had some great shows. Played at Poconos Blues Festival, which was a big one out on the East Coast for years. The album did fantastic with blues radio and satellite radio. And then the more I got into it, the more I was working on my own singing voice. And I was working on my own voice as a writer and as a guitar player and everything. And I was starting to feel kind of like, I kind of want to try something different. So, and Jim was feeling the same way at the same time with his jazz thing. So we kind of had a talk together. We're like, well, if we leave at the same time, it might help them in a way, you know what I mean? Because we were kind of the moving force behind that band, but we knew there were other people who could easily step up into that and do them justice. And that's the truth.
Yeah.
And they've made records without us, so they've done great. They did great without us. But it was a hard decision to make because they're such great people, and it was such a fun band.
Yeah.
It had a certain gestalt to it. You know, the what's the expression? What is it? The sum of the parts. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. That type of thing.
Yep.
You know, there was just something. It was a really fun band, very charismatic and very effective. And in fact, when we played the Poconos and we closed out the set, we got a standing ovation. And that was our first exposure to the national blues scene, and there was a lot of buzz about the band. So it was
Wow.
a lot of pleasant memories with it. I remember playing at the Old Town Blues Fest with Root Doctor. I think after the first record came out, and this is back when people were buying a lot of CDs. I want to say we sold 200 CDs that night or something close to it.
Wow.
It was insane. You know, like people were ready when we were ready, and it was cool. And everybody in Root Doctor stepped up to it, and it's a great memory. But again, I just had that chomping at the bit to express myself in a different way, and it's inevitable with a lot of bands, I think.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, Greg, I want to turn the page here with your experience, because you have been all over the place. I mean, you've gone all over the world. You've been at some huge venues abroad. Any favorite places along the way in your years that you've been playing?
Yes. When I was touring under my own name before the pandemic, I did several tours out to California. The owner of Biscuits and Blues in San Francisco would fly me out and then hook me up with just a stellar band on the West Coast. It was the bass player from John Lee Hooker's band, Steve Ervin on bass. Steve was on that Grammy-winning album, The Healer, that had Santana and Bonnie Raitt on it with John Lee Hooker back in the 90s. So Steve Ervin on bass, and then Derek Martin, or D-Mar, on drums. And Derek was with Little Richard for the last 14 years of Little Richard's career. And then there was a keyboard player, a couple different keyboard players, but one of them worked with Sly. And they were all a little bit younger than me, except for Steve. But they all learned my material like better than I knew my own material. So when I went up for the first time, I think Jim Alfredson saw me online somewhere, and he goes, "Man, I've never heard you sound better." I'm like, "Dude, I don't have to think about anything. These guys are kicking me in the butt." So fun, fun because they were all ticketed shows. People were there to listen. Back when people were still buying a lot of merch, I sold a ton of merch. And there was something about, you know, there's so many different styles of blues. I think while I will do some guitaristic songs, I even have a guitar instrumental on my new tune or new album. But for the most part, I think of things as being song and vocal oriented first, and then the guitar is like a support prop, if you will, like Robert Cray kind of. Robert's a great guitar player, but you think of him as his songs and his voice first. So that was kind of always my mindset. And I always noticed that when I went out to California, there was more of a reception for that approach. It's a little more subtle.
Okay.
I noticed the Midwest was a little more geared toward the more guitaristic stuff, which is cool. I love it all. Don't get me wrong. But it was shocking to me in a way how well received I was in California. And so those were great memories. And then one of my other great memories doing the Greg Nagy band thing was I played Manitoba Great Woods Music Festival. And that was the year they had some members of Canned Heat were headlining. And it was some band that was a precursor to Bachman Turner Overdrive and the Guess Who. They were a Canadian band that was huge. And it was certain members that ended up doing each of those later. And I can't think of the name of them, but they were like the headliner. And when I listened to them, they sounded just like what I described. They sounded like a combination, and I wish I could remember their name. They sounded like a combination of Bachman Turner Overdrive and the Guess Who.
Wow.
It was, so that was fun watching them. Eden Brent was on the bill, and she kept messing with me when I was playing on stage, trying to get me to come watch the Northern Lights with her while I was playing. I don't know if you know Eden. She's like,
I don't know.
He's a wonderful singer, blues pianist from Mississippi, I think. She'd be a great one. That's a great memory. And the thing that was funniest about that whole situation was it was at a campground in Manitoba. And the festival director was really, he took a shine to me for some reason. And he wanted me to meet him in the morning to drive around in his golf cart in the campground to meet all the campers. And everywhere I went, it sounds like a cliche from a movie, but everywhere I went, they had every campground early in the morning, people were drinking Molson.
Wow.
When I went to, they go, "Would you like a beer, eh?" And I'm like, "But I haven't had breakfast yet." And they say, "This is breakfast, eh?" You guys are like, really? And you do like your beer. So that was a good memory. Tampa Bay Blues Festival with Larry McCray.
Oh, yeah.
Incredible. Poconos with Root Doctor. That was incredible. WKAR Backstage Pass with both my own band and Root Doctor were incredible experiences.
I wish they were still doing that, man. I've looked at some of those and man, they're just incredible. Larry McCray, Root Doctor. I mean, a whole bunch of them were on there, and it's just so much fun the way that they put these together.
Well, it was neat because I got the Motor City Horns to come do mine with me, and they were Seeger's horn section for 15 years at least. And I was literally just talking to John Rutherford, the trombone player from that horn section, and he was all fondly remembering the WKAR show. He goes, "Man, I was just telling the guys the other day that was one of the tightest live shows I've ever done." I'm like, "Come on, you were a Seeger for 15 years." So those guys rehearsed for months before they went on the road. I'm pretty sure the Seeger shows were tighter, but I took it as a compliment. That was nice that John said that. Yeah. And for him, memory, and it was funny to me that to think about him playing in arenas, and then he was citing the WKAR Backstage Pass as a fond memory. I'm like, well, that's cool, Yeah.
Yeah,
there's a lot. I'm blanking on a lot of them. I mean, these are all involved with me playing.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I just wanted to get a feel for it. I wanted to ask you because I remember that, during that decidedly dark period of the COVID shutdown, like many other musicians, Greg, you did some really cool live shows from your home, didn't you?
Oh, yeah. I'm in the room. Now, this is the room now. It's the camera. I'm sitting at a different angle here now, but this is where in my pandemic era live streams. and it's acoustically a very, very, very dead room. It's almost like sitting in a closet. So
Really sounds good.
it sounds okay. It's out. Well,
Yeah.
it's also very peaceful. It's a very peaceful room, So it would be myself and Andrea would just come down here, and she'd be like my person who was reading the comments and the MC, and it got to the point where initially it was to try to help me before all the unemployment kicked in and all that. It was to try to help us stay afloat, but eventually it just became something for us to look forward to. And I noticed there were a handful of people that were coming all the time. The same people were coming back and back, and I learned later that some of them were already isolated before the pandemic. There was a couple.
Yeah.
There was a woman in particular in Canada who lived in like a nursing home. And she still pops in every once in a while. I go, when are you going to do another one? I'm thinking I should just do one for her. You know what I mean? Like it should just, But so it was the human connection part of it. It felt horribly disconnected, and it felt akin to probably what a lot of DJs feel when they figure out what songs to play.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
response isn't like you can't look out in front of you and see if somebody's head is bobbing or if you're heading down the right path. So there's a delay to that. But again, it was still it wasn't ideal, but it was still human connection that we craved, and I felt other people were craving in varying degrees, or a distraction at least, some kind of momentary.
Yeah. Well, there was a lot of other musicians that were doing it. I know that Garth Brooks was doing live stuff. Billy Dean was doing live stuff. You were doing your live stuff. And I remembered catching a couple of your shows, and I thought, man, this is really nice because, like you, I mean, you were craving the audience. I was craving the, being out and being able to do things and go places. And of course, we weren't able to go there for quite a while.
Right.
But I just, I'm glad that period is over. But I want to thank you because it really, it was something that helped me get through that rough time too.
Yeah, well, it felt like it was mutually hopeful. Well, the idea was that it would be mutually beneficial,
Yeah.
symbiotic or whatever. But I ran into somebody just recently because that stuff's kind of a blur now to me. Thank goodness. But
It's weird, isn't it?
yeah, I can't tell if it was a million years ago or yesterday.
It feels like yesterday. I know
Yeah.
exactly what you mean. Yeah.
It's a weird feeling. But I had somebody who used to watch all my streams come up to a show recently and just came right up. And just big, huge smile and a big, huge wave. And I didn't recognize him. Didn't recognize her right away. Hi, Greg. And they came up, give me a big hug. Or can I hug you? And then I realized, oh, that was one of the regulars. That's the first time it was like, oh, and I was driving home when I remembered that's what happened. I wish I would have recognized it in the moment. Like, oh, this is a reverent moment that we're meeting face to face, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because we met before, but it was virtual. So no, yeah, I don't. It's like, yeah, I just had that conversation about that era just last night with somebody else, and I was like, do I want to talk about this, or am I trying to forget about it?
No, and I appreciate you talking about it because it was a tough time for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was nice when we stumbled on the musicians that were doing stuff like that. Listen, you've been very patient with me. I appreciate that. We need to start talking about this new album of yours, okay? First, I want to say thank you very much for allowing me not only to be a part of your fundraiser, but also for the opportunity to preview the CD in preparation for this interview. Now, having listened to this a few times through, I'm enjoying it, but it's not purely a blues album, is it? And I think you referred to that earlier.
Yeah, well, and none of them ever really have been. Even my first one, my debut record, "Walk That Fine Thin Line," it got nominated for a BMA back when it came out, 2010, and but it was pretty eclectic. But what helps me is that there are what we call old heads in the business. People have been around a long time.
Sure.
Dick Sherman is one of them. He was a producer for Johnny Winter and Roy Buchanan and the Showdown album and all that stuff. He wrote the liner notes for my first record, and there's something that happens when somebody listens to a genre a whole lot for decades. They start to welcome different angles and different interpretations. The other guy was Bill Dahl from the Chicago Tribune. They asked him who was the most creative, promising blues type artist coming out, and he told some Toronto reporter that it was me.
Wow.
And I was shocked when I heard that, because I could find some better ones, but and that's not modesty, but
just say thank you. Come on, Greg.
but I mean, it sort of highlights that, yeah, the approach is not, I'm not a good purist. I'm not a good conventional, I mean, I appreciate it. I know where it comes from. I recognize it when I hear it. I can do some of it. I'll get into some Piedmont fingerstyle blues and some,
Sure.
more traditional stuff. But then I hear the guys who are like the craftsmen of it, who really got it honed down. And I go, yeah, that's already being done. So what can I do that maybe nobody else is doing that I'm aware of? And so that's what drives my creative spirit. Part of it is too, a lot of my creativity. Well, I guess reflecting on it further, part of my creativity comes from my shortcomings, so I go, oh, I can't do this, but I can do this thing over here. And then, so it's not even just necessarily trying to rest on your present strengths. It's like challenging yourself, leaving your peripheral vision open for fresh ideas, approaches, but knowing that you're going to probably tick a purist off, but then that's not everybody has to like what you do. It's like, yeah, okay, that's cool. I just,
and look, you're never going to please everybody. That's just the way it is,
was it Ricky Nelson had the garden party song? Remember the
Can't
whistle?
please everyone, so you got to please yourself. Yep.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Yep. Well, Greg, I have to tell you, I enjoyed the covers on this album as well. You had some great collaborations. Your rendition of Something I thought was pretty damn gutsy. You're covering a Beatles tune.
Yeah.
But you really knocked it out of the park, and that collaboration was something else too. And it's up to you if you want to tip your hand and talk about it.
Oh, I can. Absolutely. Years ago, before the pandemic thing we were talking about, Thornetta Davis and I were asked to do part of a review or an homage to the Beatles album Abbey Road. And we were asked to sing Something as a duet. And we did the show and heard later that there wasn't barely a dry eye in the audience after we did it. And Thornetta saw that, and people, all the years after that, she kept coming up to me going, when are we going to record that? When do we record that? And I'm like, I wasn't feeling an album, so I kept giving it lip service. Well, why don't you record it and I'll come get it here. The studio. I was like, well, now's the time. I guess it's going to be on my record. But what's funny about it is the reason I always lean toward her releasing it is because she sings the first verse. Because typically when you have a duet on an album, whoever the artist, typically, again, here's me taking a left turn, right? Whoever album it is, they'll do the first verse, and then the surprise person, saunters on the next verse. But no, she comes right out of the gate. I think that's a happy accident, actually, because it's also, even though it's a conventional tune in many ways, I'm doing a Chestnut cover. It's just another slight left turn to convention, right? And then the other thing that kind of gave me some permission slip to chase after it with a more soulful, bluesy rendition was that I read that George Harrison said that when he wrote that song, he could hear Ray Charles singing it. Like he heard soul elements and blues elements being infused. So I thought, and I heard it when I heard the song. I'm like, I can't sing like George Harrison. He's got that certain wispy, vulnerable.
Yep.
And he's not faking it. It's just the way he sings. And when I try to sound wispy and vulnerable, I just sound like I just woke up. I don't sound like my voice, and it does her voice. So, and then Motor City Josh played the solo on it, and he did a great job. And he played slide on it, and so it's just a wonderful experience across the board. And I just play acoustic on it, which is, I do it live. I play the electric, and I'll do the solo like George Harrison. And I kept trying to for it, and I kept sounding like the George Harrison solo. I'm like, no, I can't do that. So Josh is like, can I take a stab at it? I'm like, please do. And he knocked it out of the park. So
very cool.
That's one of those lessons that sometimes you just have to get out of your own way. And and let the song, you know, inform you as the person, inform you in what direction. I was gonna say as the artist, but it's not pretentious.
Right.
What,
Yeah. I get it.
yeah, what direction to go in.
So you also had a couple of other people on the album too, if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. Well,
I
my
mean,
boss.
it was a fun collaboration. I got to tell you, I loved the album because of what you did with it.
Well, it sort of unfolded that way because I've never done that before. It's always been all me, and the all me thing allows me to just put my unique stamp on everything, right?
Sure.
But then I'm like, uh, literally, my friends are asking, "Hey, man, if you need me, I'll come play in something, Okay, I'll keep in mind." And I was honored that they all said it. And I work with all these people, and because I work with them, I hear what they do. And so when I got to certain tracks, I was like, I started tracking some of my own solos on a couple of these where the guest artists ended up. And I thought, man, I really hear Larry McCray on this tune, you know? And Josh kind of said it to me first, actually. He goes, man, Larry. I was like, oh, I'm working on it. And then I thought, nah, he's right. Those bombs that even Bonamassa doesn't quite. I mean, I'm not ripping on Joe. Joe's
No,
amazing.
no.
Even Joe will acknowledge, like, these are the goosebump dive bomb Larry things that he does.
Yep.
Like in the next 6 months, trying to figure out a couple of those, or call Larry up and go, hey, dude, come on down. So he came down to this room that I'm sitting in now, and he played on one track, Nevermind, and just totally helped seal the deal. And then we traded, a little bit at the outro on some leads. Bobby Murray, I've been working with Bobby Murray and singing and playing guitar with Bobby Murray for years now. I'm on his title track of his last album and singing. And Bobby came in here, same place. And that whole process was crazy because I was going for an acoustic vibe on this tune. And then Bobby's like, oh, Bobby was, he kind of admitted he wasn't that much of an acoustic player. Can he play electric on it? I'm like, well, we can try it, but I'm playing all this acoustic stuff. This might not work. And it didn't really work at first because what had happened is the acoustic track had everything light. The drums were light, the bass was light. So Bobby came and played all this cool stuff. And I'm like, wow, this is actually cool. It's the first time I ever had a deal where I had to go back in and re-record the rhythm section to make it more, muscular. And Josh said that was the first time all the hundreds of albums that he's done, the first time he did that. And it was one of those things, being open and getting out of your own way and saying, okay, we're going to build this around Bobby's energy now. Does that make sense?
And it really comes across. I mean, when you listen to the album from start to finish, even though, as you say, it's an eclectic blend, if you listen to each piece on its own merits, you can feel that vibe changing. And of course, like you said, there's no mistaking Larry McCray's play. Okay. As soon as I heard that guitar in that song, I'm like, oh, all right, there's where McCray's at, and of course, Thornetta's voice, and it was, to me, it was such a fun experience listening to that, because I knew that, it was something that you really strived to bring out the very best in this album. I mean, it was like a real labor of love as you were producing this album and putting it together.
Well, yes. And it was funny. It was funny that, I had one friend who thought it was me playing where Larry was playing. He goes, oh my gosh, Larry's rubbed off on you. And I'm like, no, he didn't. And then I come to Papa. Somebody said, is that Larry? I'm like, no, that's me. But I know it doesn't sound like Larry, but it's close enough with the attitude,
Yeah.
So there's that kind of nebulousness. And then the other guest, I had a couple other cool guest artists. Ray Goodman, who played with Mitch Ryder for years, and then he was in a band called SR out of Detroit. That's kind of legendary. Ray Goodman also worked with Dick Wagner. Dick was Alice Cooper's guitar player, but he worked with Dick Wagner for years. The guy that wrote Only Women Bleed. And so Ray's a great guitar player across the board, electric and acoustic and everything. And I said, bring your dobro. And he's like, man, I want to rip some, electric. And I'm like, no, bring your dobro, man. So we did that Mississippi Blues together, which is old traditional blues tune.
Oh,
and
man.
I'm sitting right here, right where I'm sitting, the two of us, we had two different mics going. We did it live. And then once I got done, I started thinking, man, I think some really clean harmonica on top of that would be cool. I called Peter Madcat Ruth up, and he's like, "Hey, Greg, it's been a long time, and we've never worked together, but we've always wanted to work together."
Sure.
Like, "Hey, Peter, what do you think about playing over this?" "Sure, man, send it down." So I sent it down to Ann Arbor. He popped that in. I popped the vocal in after the fact because I wasn't sure where the energy was going. You know what I mean? Uh, and that whole thing was probably the quickest, easiest song ever. Two guitars, harmonic, and voice, and it's a favorite of a lot of people. Dave Spector wrote me that was one of his favorite tracks. Yeah. And you
Same.
and I'm going, well, good. You know what? I can make a record of those pretty cheaply because it was all here. So that me. So that was cool. And then I co-wrote a song with Steve Ferrari, who was a Lansing legend. And before Steve passed, he was sending me song ideas and songs he was working on. And that's the second to the last track. And just last night, his son called me because I left him a message with condolences that his father had passed,
Sure.
He called me and I played it over the phone for him nervously, like, because he wanted to hear it.
Wow.
And I was very nervous about it because, like, come on. And he said, wait, let me get my wife on the phone. And he said, man, you're making us cry. That's beautiful. Thank you. That means so much. And I was like, wow, that feels really reverent to me because I really was. I don't worry generally too much about external validation for songs, what other people may or may not feel, because I feel we all have our own tastes and approaches to music.
Sure.
But the son of one of my heroes. And it's like when Bobby Murray said that Etta James, that song I sang for Bobby Murray on his record was a song Bobby wrote about Etta. Bobby said he played it for Etta's kids, and they both cried. And so then my joke was it that bad? But no, but in all seriousness, they were moved by it, and I just said that was the intention. The intention was for this to be meaningful. Does that make
and it comes across that way too. It really does. I'm glad to
raw,
know the backstory.
It's a little one of the more raw tracks too. You can hear me shifting around and my guitar making a little noise, and I might even clear my throat somewhere. And one of my friends said, "Hey, you gonna leave it that raw?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I am," because that's how when he was sending demos to me and ideas, that's how they sounded when he would send them to me. Steve would send it to my phone. It just sounded very organic and real, and like you're just sitting in front of the person. Versus something super, cleaned up. And then the last one, the joke, that my sister, that was a request of my sister, and who's having some serious health issues. And that cover, and I was like, oh, I can't do a Brandy Carlisle tune. But then I just thought about the words, and I thought about my sister and her life and everybody's struggles, like the lyrics are very poignant, I think, are very powerful. I just thought about the words more than anything else, and then I just did my own thing with it, and I sent it to somebody who's actually worked with her, and they thought I did a great job. But what's more important to me is that my sister was moved by it. She liked it. It's the same with so even if those two tracks don't see the light of day, the fact that the intention behind them was to honor somebody and somebody felt it was honorable, those become my favorite tracks, even though they, I've had those on the previous records too. Like I had a song called I Won't Give Up. That was kind of my post-divorce anthem. And I had other songs make XM radio. Nobody played I Won't Give Up. But I would run into people who had the album and they said, oh my God, that song was so moving. I'm like, yeah, but it was too subtle for me. They played Stranded a lot, which is cool. But yeah, sorry, you got to rope me in. Sometimes my ADD takes me about 18 different directions here, but
no. Listen, the whole purpose of this program, if you don't know it by now, Greg, is to get stories, and you're giving me a treasure trove, and I really appreciate that. But let me ask you, because I haven't gotten a straight answer from you yet. I know you got CDs coming out. What about vinyl? Is vinyl going to be available? Is that something you're going to do?
Jim Kessling is the mastering engineer out of Detroit that that's doing my record, and I literally just emailed him last night saying I'm going to do vinyl. So he's got to do it. Yeah, so he's got to split. Guess what song's going to start side 2? You
I
can
don't
do
know.
it. Something.
Oh no! Wow!
Yeah. Side 2.
Wow!
You gotta split them up. So
Oh yeah. I never even thought about that. That is so cool. And listen, I will commit to buying a piece of vinyl because I
there's
think
one.
you can see some of my vinyl here, right?
I can.
Yeah. I have about 300 pieces of vinyl that I've amassed since April of this year. And
Wow.
this is you can't see it, but I've got an ultrasonic cleaner over here. I have cleaned every piece of vinyl I own. This is my treasure. I absolutely love all of this. And it's not just the goodies hanging on the wall here. I am having so much fun listening to, and I've got a variety. I've got old blues, I've got new blues, I've got rockin' blues. I got some Bonamassa in here. That's absolutely rockin' blues, but
Yeah.
absolutely sign me up. Definitely will buy at least one from you. Greg, where can people get more information on your CD? Maybe pick up some others and some merchandise if you have it available. And most importantly, where can they go to book you for a gig, man?
Oh yeah, all that stuff is at the website, which I got fortunate enough to get the, what do you call it, URL? Is that what they call it? GregNagy.com, GregNagy.com.
Okay.
It'll all be on there. I'm going to set it up mostly that people can just buy direct from me, like do a PayPal, and I'll send it. The distribution's weird now. Like, used to be you could use CD Baby and stuff, and they would do hard copies. Now they just do digital distribution. So probably the tangible. Somebody wants a souvenir, they want something signed,
Sure.
even whether CD player or not. Some people like to have the palpable, tangible, physical product. I'm just going to sell those myself from the website and at gigs. Also on the website, there's the booking contact. Underneath the contact, there's the booking info, and then I've got the info for. I have Michelle Castilla doing radio and press promo for this record for the next. And I have her contact on there. So if any DJs or press or other podcasters need to get a hold of me, well, podcasters can contact me directly. But I don't have the product to send radio, so she's got that product. So they'd have to contact her. Yeah, it's all there at GregNagy.com.
Very cool. And I'll make sure to put that up because this is going to be an exclusive content episode, which means it's going up as soon as it's done being edited. So my hope is to get it up tonight or tomorrow morning because it releases tomorrow. So we definitely want to tie that in. But Greg Nagy, it's been a pleasure, my friend. I wish you much continued success. I hope you sell all of those CDs fast and a whole bunch of vinyl. And for those considering the purchase, let me just tell you from my heart that I can attest to the worth. It's worth it. Spend the money, pick it up. You'll enjoy it. Order yours today. Greg, any final thoughts from you, sir?
No, you're awesome though. I enjoyed this. You made it really easy. So, I appreciate you, man.
Well, I appreciate you too. And that wraps up this edition of Time Signatures with Jim Ervin. Once again, my thanks to our guest, Greg Nagy, but also to you, because if it wasn't for you, none of this would be possible. Jim Ervin reminding you that keeping the blues alive is everyone's responsibility, but preserving the history of the blues, one story at a time, is my mission. Until next time, so long, my friends.
This has been Time Signatures with Jim Ervin, presented by the Capital Area Blues Society in Lansing, Michigan. For more information on cabs, visit capitalareablues.org. You can find this episode and past episodes at lccconnect.org. The Time Signatures theme song, Michigan Roads, is used by permission and was written by Root Doctor, featuring Freddie Cunningham.
I'm trying, baby, driving up and down these Michigan roads, yeah.
Until next time, keep on keeping the blues alive.